directors and what the art department does in brief. We transform written stories into physical environments crucial to the story's visual authenticity. And I have to make sure I'm on the right page here. And this is so a viewer, your audience member can suspend belief for a moment and be transported to an entirely different reality. It's interesting because Brad Ricker was talking to me yesterday and he said that the producers came into their office when the first week that they were beginning to set up and so forth and said, this is the department that drives the movie. This is the Black Panther sequel. And that's what the producers told the told the art department. So it is true that that's exactly what we do. And he said it's really wonderful because in Black Panther what you're doing is African American futurism and creating what that is going to look like. So that's the job of the art department. Now, these environments must also fit the characters and the circumstances of the story. So we have each one of them, whether it's a fantasy, whether it's reality, whether it's comic, whether it's tragic, whether it's period, whether it's anything, they all have to be authentic to the story. Know that tomorrow we will have a Game of Thrones panel and it will be on Saturday, and I have art directors from London, production designer Deb Riley from Australia, director Alan Taylor from New York City, and storyboard artist Jane Wu from Los Angeles, all at the same time. So be sure and tune in. That'll be fun too. And it takes a lot of craftsmen, an ensemble of artists and craftsmen. Production designer heads the department and in concert with the director and the movie's visionaries. So art directors manage the art department, transforming the production designer's visual concepts into three-dimensional reality. Illustrators will make the concept drawings. Rick, as a set designer, will draw them all up and make white models out of them. And Ellen would art direct them in the process, so that the concept drawings get to Rick. Rick draws them up so they can be constructed so that the finished set can look like this. And that's all Hugo. And now I'm going to skip the rest of this for right now, and I'll stop sharing because we're going to talk about the experiences from. So Ellen, you just finished working on some project and I don't even know what it was. How was it?
American Gigolo, the pilot.
Oh, fun. That's great. Did you have, I know it was like one time I saw you was freezing and you were in the middle of, it was somewhere in the dark.
We had a trailer park set in Lancaster.
Oh my gosh.
But after the trailer parks, we got to go to fancy mansions and hotels.
Oh, well, that's fun. That's fun. But trailer parks are also fun.
They are, but not necessarily in Lancaster.
Yes, they're not in the cold at the moment. Yes. Yeah. And the cold winter nights. And Rick, you've been working solidly. So, and why don't you describe what a set designer does, Rick, and tell us what.
Sure. As you said, we take a concept that could be an illustration, could be concept drawings, could be sketches, could be photographs downloaded, from a search of, let's say you want to do a craftsman house. So I could get a dozen different views of different craftsman houses. And that's kind of the impetus for the design. And then we work with the art director and production designer on a plan that we draw up that can accommodate filming. It's, I started out in architecture and I was, drawing up real buildings, and we want it to look like a real building, but we have to have walls that move out of the way for a camera and that fit on a space, those sort of things. So we take all that in consideration. And then we start usually with a floor plan, and then we develop elevations. We may do 3D models, 3D views. We could do white models. Hold on. That's my 88-year-old stepmother calling me for my daily being bothered about absolutely nothing of importance. So she can wait. So, we deal with all of those things and come up with a plan based on a budget. We get feedback on that, and we come up with basically working architectural drawings from which construction will build something that hopefully turns out like what everybody wanted it to.
And then that goes back to Ellen, who is making sure that the construction department understands and that things are getting done. So why don't you give us a little overview of art direction?
Okay, it's kind of a big category, and every art director I've noticed approaches it a little bit differently. Some art directors are strictly hands-on analog people. Others are very heavily digitally based. But in general, I'd say the art director is kind of like the first lieutenant to the production designer. It's like whatever the production designer happens to need to get that vision out into reality is what we do. Whether that's managing the people, managing the resources, helping the designer with a technology issue, doing the 3D modeling before it goes to the set designers for detailing out and actual construction drawings, or like some designers will do their own 3D modeling or in concepting, and others will just hand you a pencil sketch or a pile of research, or some are entirely self-contained and they just need you to manage the day-to-day scheduling and calendaring and people, and others want to be fully partnered. So it really kind of depends on the team you're with. But I feel like in general, the art director is hopefully the person in the department with the widest skill set as far as understanding what everybody in the department does, from the graphic designer to the PA, to the coordinator, to the set designer, and also a direct liaison to other departments such as special effects, locations, production, sometimes costumes and props, because costumes and props will need assistance from the art department for graphics or for other issues. So you're kind of a central hub of information. It's expected that you kind of know everything that's going on and when it's happening and who to talk to if a problem arises.
That's really well put, Ellen. I always say it's the art director drives the bus. It's simply put. But what you come from a graphics background too, aren't you? You were a graphic artist and designer and that became an art director when you moved into Local 800. So tell us about your journey through those, if you may.
Sure. Actually, I kind of landed as a graphic designer first because it was oddly enough the easiest job to get. I was actually trained as a theatrical set and costume designer.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a little detour after grad school and designed exhibits for Mattel for a long time. And then a friend of mine there, art director John Vertrees, happened to be working on a pilot, and he said, "Come have lunch." And then he said, "Bring your resume." I'm like, "Why would I bring my resume to lunch?" But he was working on a new pilot, and they had just lost their PA, and I had just left Mattel and was relaxing and doing nothing. So I was like, "All right, fine." So I interviewed for the PA job and I got it. And I didn't know that for a long time I was an illegal PA because they basically wanted me to be the graphic designer right off the bat. But after a few years of graphic designing, it became obvious to the people I worked with that I had other skills, and I was allowed to start art directing. And that's primarily what I do now.
That's great. So we already have a question. Thank you very much. And that is, how much of your work is being replaced with CGI these days, or is it?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. There's a little more CGI now than there were before computers, because that's what the C stands for. But I mean, everyone's heard of the famous story of The Mandalorian, where they used the volume. and they shoot it in camera. However, everyone I've talked to from Mandalorian and other groups, we recently did a deep dive with them through the Unreal Fellowship, tells us that what's happening is maybe the sets, as in like the rocks and the sand, aren't being built or we're not flying crew out there. However, there's more work than ever for the art department because all of the props and all of the physical pieces that the characters interact with or immediately right behind the characters are still being built, and they're being built ahead of time, 3D scanned, and then being put into the environment. So the workload is just shifting, but I don't see it actually getting any less.
Yeah, I was going to say, I also, I remember doing a project myself about a decade ago, and it was so much cheaper to build Air Force One from scratch by renting pieces of a 747 from the desert and bringing it in and building it than it was CGI. It's just cheaper.
It really depends on the approach you take, especially right now with new technology like Unreal coming into play, and the approach of your visual effects supervisor. You really, if you're a responsible art department, maintaining and creating a really good relationship with visual effects is super important to keep the production designer's vision intact, because oftentimes post takes over or visual effects takes over after we're done. So as long as we can maintain that, on a lot of shows I work with, we will turn over our 3D models to visual effects so that they can continue the work we're doing, or we can suggest, like, here's what we're physically building, this is what the extension would look like, and we can work together rather than just kind of letting it become another department's responsibility.
And that's the way it should be done too.
Let's hope.
Well, it should be done that way because that's protecting and actually the cinematographers believe that too. It's like anything you can do in camera, let's do it that way so that we don't end up having the entire vision that we've created changed in post-production. What about you, Rick?
Well, like you said, I keep pretty busy drawing real physical sets. There's a lot more involvement with visual effects, I think, than when I first started. I have I'm going to put a different background up so you can see. I tried to pick some things I thought would be of interest to these folks here. So this is, I don't know if you can, well, it's not very good. It's kind of small. All this cloud, that's visual effects, but there's a supermarket that was real, parking lot that was real, the cars are real. We actually built, you can see in the background, maybe if I get out of the way, there's another set, that's a facade that we built. It's a nod to Stephen King, who wrote the novella that The Mist was taken from. So we built that has some depth to it so we could dress it on the inside. But all the, the monsters, some of them were rubber, monsters, but a lot of the bugs were visual effects were brought in, were digital, the clouds, the mist itself. So it's a mix of things. We need to be able to, be versatile and deal with real physical things, but also with, make them so that they can bring in the effects and take care of that. We had some great effects people on the Mist. They had just finished Pan's Labyrinth. So they were well versed in melding the two together. So we're still keeping quite busy building actual physical things. I tend to work on television rather than film. I've done a number of films, but mostly television. There seems to be less, although it's changing all the time. As Ellen said, The Mandalorian is all CGI or most of it. So it's coming into television and streaming more and more. But we're still doing lots of physical, actual real sets. So.
Yeah, that's great. And television is a very fast-paced world, especially if you're doing hour-long television, isn't it?
It's very different. On the Mist, I'm bringing that up again because I think it might have been, of interest to the folks watching. I guess it's more horror than it is sci-fi, but anyway.
It's
yeah, it's in that genre, I think. Now I lost my thought. What was?
sorry. Yes.
What was your question?
And the question was, the television is,
Oh,
episodic
right.
television is
Yeah.
really harder.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, when I did The Mist, we had a whole script. So you know going in kind of what you're going to need. There's also usually more time. I developed a 1/24th scale model of the grocery store, and I thought I spent a couple of weeks making a very realistic top could come off so they could look. And I thought, this is just, I'm spinning my wheels here. And as soon as the director, Brent Garabon, showed up, he was like, oh, this is so great. I can lay my shots out. I can look through, this plexiglass front you've built here, and I can see how everything's going to work. So we had a lot more time to develop that, and we knew what was expected, and we had a schedule that we could keep to. Whereas in television, every week you're getting a new script, or every 8 days, a
Every
new
2
script.
days.
Yeah, yeah, 5 days on a half hour, and so it's like you got to be ready, right away. So it's a completely different pace, and I think television production today is where film was even 5 years ago. I mean, the shows are much bigger, the sets are bigger,
Oh, huge.
the effects, all of it is where film was 5-10 years ago. We're doing every week. So it's challenging. It's challenging for
It
sure.
is challenging. And it was, I worked on one of the shows that completely changed the entire mode of television, and that was Miami Vice. Before that time, the cameras were all pretty much blocked really simply, even in hour-long shows. And then Michael Mann came along and completely shifted the whole look of everything. And it just keeps shifting. And they keep pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope. And you're right, and it's faster and faster and faster. And I can remember actually doing an hour-long show once where we didn't get a script until 2 days before we started shooting. So the director and I just went around and picked locations that we wanted to shoot in and gave them to the writers and said, here, work around this one. Anyway, so what inspired you to work in the career that you're in?
Who are you
The
asking?
Phantom of the Opera.
Both of you, one at a time. What inspired you to become to work in the art department? To even become Ellen, you said you were a trained costume and set designer for theater. What inspired you to do that?
The Phantom of the Opera.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, growing up as an immigrant child, theater was really not part of our lives. So we took a little high school field trip to see Phantom of the Opera at the Amundsen. I'm like, oh, that looks fun. That's a lot more fun than being a scientist or something. So off to design school I went.
Oh, that's cool. What about you? Well, Rick, you were an architect.
Yeah, I worked in architecture, and I got into the business just a weird way. I had a car accident, and my physical therapist was partnered with a UPM, and they knew I had been an architect and could draw, and she called me up and asked me if I could be a set designer, and I had no idea what that was. I said sure. And she said, "Okay, I'm doing a TV movie in Montana." And I said, "Okay." And like a week later, I got in a truck and drove up to Montana and started drawing. And other than a little interruption from a big car accident, I've pretty much done it ever since. So it's different. I used to worry about how much, when we build a set, a lot of the pieces don't get recycled. They get put in a dumpster, sent to a landfill. And that really bothered me for a long time. But I think now there's much more consciousness. We're reusing a lot of set walls, repurposing them. So I feel a little bit better about that. And when you're doing architecture, I started doing architecture where I was doing mostly corporate work. And I never met the people that actually were in the space. And I wanted to be more, engaged with the people who are actually going to use the space and come from that place. So I started doing commercial office design. And now I have, instead of just a few people that use my spaces, I have millions and millions of people around the world. So it's fun.
That's so interesting, because I too started out in environmental design thinking I would be an architect. And then I jump cut to working in a location called Filoli Mansion up in Woodside on a project. And one of my architectural friends from UC Berkeley, where I went to undergrad school, came through, and I went, "Hi, gosh, it's good to see you. I think I used one of your buildings. Oh my God, I think I used one of your buildings on Miami Vice." And he went, "Really? That means everybody got to see it." And I said, "Oh, I was going to apologize." And he said, "Oh no, that means people around the world could see it." Yeah, it's and I use the idea that if you're working as an architect, you maybe do one project a year or one project every 2 years, and if you're what we do, we may be doing 300 different builds in a year, or in a season even, which could be less than a year. So I have another question about locations, guys. What do you do about how do you deal with scouting locations, and how does your time tie into scouting locations versus builds? And let's also realize that sometimes when you scout locations because you have to build something in the location too. So
Almost always, actually. Like a lot of people think you go to location, it means the art department doesn't have to do anything, and that's almost the exact opposite. It's more work for the art department to go to a location most of the time, because you're off-site, you're away from all your stuff, you have to move the entire company over there to film. It's a hugely expensive endeavor, and oftentimes we go in, we might completely obliterate the place as you might have known it. We total repaint, new walls, tear out walls, build a set inside the walls. So going to location is not mutually exclusive from building on stage. And there are times like the pilot I just did, it was a pilot, so we had no stage space at all. So it was all locations purely out of necessity. So there are times when I will not see my designer for weeks on end because he is doing nothing but scouting. And it is heartbreaking when you're all set for a location and then you lose it. And then you have to change gears right away.
And then there are also films like, I love to use Inception as an example, which Brad Ricker actually worked on. I'm hoping he'll be able to join us later. But he said that, yes, they shot in 5 countries on 4 continents. And Guy Diaz said he landed in Paris at one point, and the flight crew came up to him and said, "What is it that you do? You have the same turnaround schedule we do." And he laughed because he was constantly in the air flying places. Rick, what about you? You build on.
I was going to say it's the melding too of locations to stage. The background here, as I said, that's a real location. It was in Shreveport, Louisiana. The grocery store existed, but we recreated the whole facade of the grocery store and the whole interior of the grocery store, because we couldn't film every day at a grocery store. They were, people in business. So I had to measure the entire facade of the grocery store so that we could do something that would, to the camera, look close enough when we did approaching shots, and then we shot what we actually built on stage. So it was a blending of the two. At this location, we actually brought out Pierre from who took photographs from the front of the grocery store to see what the road and everything looked like, and we printed a giant backdrop that we used on stage. So you're blending what you see on location with sometimes what you're actually building, and they need to mesh. They need to look real and look like they're together. So I out there measuring parking lot layout and how big the spaces were and where we were going to put cars, and then you do a plan so that so that transportation knows which cars are going in which parking spot for this scene, and then we'll shuffle them around and they're over here. So locations can be every bit as involved and time consuming as far as our work concerned for the art department as a set. Oh,
I'll
and
add that
sometimes you have
sometimes
to
we,
go
we don't
back.
just meld. Oh, sorry, Rick.
I was just say sometimes you have to go back and reestablish what you've done before. So it's challenging. So sorry, Ellen.
So I just wanted to add that sometimes in addition to just meshing with a location, sometimes we will just simply copy a location. If it becomes a place we go back to a lot, like a hero character's home, we might start at a location because we don't know how much time we'll spend there, but it becomes so important that we'll end up just copying that location in its entirely on stage, either the interior or the exterior. And then when we do that, sometimes it's just a straight copy so that it matches in the camera. And other times we were able to fix things like changing the layouts of pass-throughs to other rooms or creating camera positions that we would not be able to get on the location to make it easier for the company to shoot.
And sometimes a movie is a location movie. I did the movie Harriet recently by Harriet Tubman, and that was basically a road picture. I mean, she spent, days and weeks alone, traveling from one part of the country to another to escape slavery and then to bring people out of slavery to freedom in the North. And a lot of that was done on the road. So you're out there doing a plan so that they know where everything is. And a lot of what I had to get used to in this business is a lot of things that I spent a lot of time on, a lot of effort that are very important to me. And then they're like a moment in the show, a moment on the screen. And I used to get like, here I'm doing this whole big set, and then they show this little corner of it, with focusing on the actor. And I had to frankly, come to terms with that and realize that without us, without our sets, they can't act.
That's right. Where a cinematographer will say, if the art department doesn't give me something to shoot, all I have is the actor's face. And then the editors will say, and if the actor makes mistakes and you can't use the cut, you don't have anything to cut away to unless we give them something. So we have another question, and it's do you have a favorite genre that you like to work in, or do you just love whatever it is that you're doing?
Me personally, I love sci-fi and fantasy because I feel like you get to really stretch. There are times when a lot of television you might watch is based in straight up reality and you get tired of doing 17 apartments in a row. But but every show has its challenges that are kind of independent of the genre. So it really depends. It comes down to a really good story and a really good relationship with the directing team and the showrunner team to see like how much they want to partner with the art department in creating that story. Because there are some lesser fun shows where the showrunners don't think that the art department is much more than someone who provides a chair for the actor to sit on. So it's much more fun when you get to be involved up front with a good team that respects what you do and is happy to receive your input and actually collaborate about like this thing behind me is we spent months thinking about this penthouse suite, but it could have been, could have just gone to a fancy hotel or something, but it really became a character unto itself. And those are the best shows. It doesn't have to be a sci-fi show, but it kind of helps because you get to do things that look a little different.
What about you, Rick?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. We spend 10, 12 more hours a day with our coworkers. So it's really important that you get along and like those people and that you respect one another. So to me, that's the most important. Personally, I'm getting into, I think it's The Last Kingdom on Netflix and Cursed. They're sort of period warrior, King Arthur kind of thing. So I love those sort of fantasy things. I'm a cowboy, so I love Westerns, although I don't get to work on them very much. They're not a real popular genre these days. And I really, I want to work on some queer films, queer stories. So I think the thing I'm most proud of is my work on Harriet because of how important that story was. It was not a complicated set design show. Like I said, it was a road show. I did an outhouse and I did a corn crib and I did odd things like that. It wasn't big fancy sets, which are always fun to do, and I love those. But it's really kind of where the story's coming from for me, for as far as working on it. My choice would be cowboy movies or these sort of fantasy gladiator warrior kind of movies that I like to watch. And it's funny because we're usually working late in the day, so we don't often get to see, particularly in television, we don't get to see the episodes that we worked on because we're working on the one that's going to be shot next. So I think it's important to like who you're working with, feel good about the story, and that kind of guides me.
Okay, so let me just ask a couple of questions then too, because Harriet Tubman, that means you can't go down to the hardware store and get Harriet Tubman nails because they didn't make them and they don't make them anymore, probably. So that takes a lot of historical research for you for drawing things up, doesn't it? Rick?
Oh, me?
I mean, right?
Yeah, it does.
In history, you got to make sure that the outhouse is the right kind of outhouse for that particular era.
Right. And it's gotten easier with the internet. When I first started, you were going to the library, going through books, magazines, whatever you could do to find reference and inspiration. And now so much is online that that's almost overwhelming. Then you get like, could drown in all of it. And coming from an architecture background, I frankly know more about architecture than a lot of the people I work for, that I work under. And that sometimes that gets in the way. I have to back off and say, okay, this is television. It doesn't have to make sense plan wise. It has to make sense shooting wise. It has to be shootable. That's what's important. Not that this room coordinates with that, and it's how the actors move through the stage. That's the space. That's what's important. So I have to kind of balance my I guess my natural bend to be exact and be just like it should be, with the reality of this is television or this is a movie, and we're stretching reality here and kind of let go of some of that. So it's a balancing act for me.
Sure. And what about you, Ellen? In terms of, I mean, even when you're doing fantasy, you've got to create fantasy on some sort of reality, don't you?
Well, it depends on the script, and it depends on the intention of the director. I mean, hopefully you get to have a meeting up front with somebody who has an idea about how they want to shoot it, like whether they lay down the law, like it's going to be real, we're going to go someplace else. You mentioned Inception earlier. I mean, I would call that very unreal, but with real elements. We've mentioned The Mandalorian a few times. It's also real, but not real, with a lot of elements. Like all those backgrounds were shot someplace on Earth, but they've been presented to you as places out in space. So I think you can't make a blanket statement about any of this work we do, other than it's really fun. But it's you really have to sit down. And I feel like this is where my theater background really came in handy, because I have a deep background in history, art history, and costume history and architectural history. So like just a visual language that you come in with, as Rick mentioned. But we know that as designers for entertainment, we break all of those rules that you learned, about Doric capitals. Like, well, okay, fine, that's what it is, but we don't have to follow that particular rule for this set about Greece. And the people that you're working with really bring a lot to bear too. And also, sometimes a designer wants to just break the mold and do totally crazy things, and other times they want to just give the director exactly what the director says he wants. And sometimes they're very clear. Like, I want a 20 by 20 room with a window here and a window there. And the DP is going to come in and tell you how he wants to light it and like the mood he wants to set. And it's our job to provide that space for the actors when they walk in and the shooting team, so that even if we don't see it on camera, they feel like they're in that world and they're inhabiting the world and they can bring the best performance to the screen.
That's great. Matthew's joined us. Yay. How are things back in Atlanta?
Oh, it's good. I was happy to be here because I was in the middle of a long Zoom meeting, a production meeting for 2 blocks of episodes for The Walking Dead. And they're pretty ambitious and they like to talk a lot. So and we had a 5-hour tech scout, Zoom tech scout yesterday. So it's happy to just get out of there. So it's nice to be here. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's your wife's birthday today, I guess.
I think it's tomorrow.
Okay.
Close. Yeah.
That's close because somebody was taking, I invited her to come today too, and she said that she was going out to lunch.
Gotcha.
So there you go. Anyway, so we're just been talking about what the job of an art director is, and it varies from project to project, but you also have been a production designer as well, and now you've decided that art directing is where you want to hang your hat for now. And so why don't you give us a little overview of the differences and your choices?
Well, yeah, they are different, but they also are very intertwined. I've been doing mostly television. I've designed a number of features and worked on a number of features, but I've been really mostly rooted in television, and art direction in television and production design in television are a little different than on feature films. And the main reason being that we're doing just one episode after another. The story never ends. There's not really a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, so we're always on the go, always prepping for the next thing. And as a result, the art director's job, and one reason I've decided that, you know, I'm just going to stick with the art directing, is that, you know, my job entails a lot of creativity, a lot of the same creativity that I used when I was designing movies and designing TV shows. And although I'm not the main mouthpiece for the concept, right, I am very supportive of the designer, and I'm working with a wonderful designer now that includes me in pretty much all aspects. So I would say that designer in general is the conceptual person, the one that has to read the scripts. We all read the scripts, but has to read the scripts and deal with the writers, the showrunners, the directors, and sell the ideas. He'll be the one working with the illustrators or concept artists, those people, and has to basically come up with the big ideas. And then the art director, on the other hand, supports those ideas, but also has to have a lot of technical knowledge. Also has to really understand construction, really understand drafting, really understand how plasters work, how things are built, architectural history, architectural detailing. Because when I'm art directing, my main responsibilities are get it all done in a fairly short time frame. Just
On budget, right?
Figure out, okay, is this too big for us to accomplish in this time frame or within the budgets, or is this doable? And if it is doable, how many details can we achieve? You know, what can we really accomplish, you know, within that time frame and within the budget? And then just supervise, you know, the set designers, the graphic artists, the painters, the plasterers, just be on them all the time and making sure that we're on schedule, making sure that it's going to be done in time for set deck to get in there and dress the sets properly, done in time so that the lighting people can get in there and rig the lights. So yeah, it's a responsible job. It's good, and there's a lot of creativity, but there's also a lot of responsibility for just making things happen, right?
Right. That's true. Absolutely. We have a question. We've been getting some good questions from the audience today. So let me say, let me ask a question that just came up in the chat, which is, do you ever get your inspiration? Does the production designer get its inspiration from the director, the writer? Of course you, I mean, I would say, of course you do, but it's like your experience in that, all three of you, because it's like, that's the question was, and so the writer, an actor, somebody comes up with an inspiring thought, and you go, okay, let's build that. What do you think?
Well, well, to me, it's always been, and I heard Ellen mention earlier a lot of experience in the theater. I came from the theater as well as architecture. I actually dropped out of architecture and got into theater because it was far more interesting,
And
far
fun.
more conceptual.
Mhm.
And, you know, when you brought up understanding stories and taken to the theater and shown great movies and classics, telling a story seemed very important to me at that time. And the best way to tell a story as a designer or an art director, but as a designer in my book, is to really read the script, really understand what's happening there, and really try to find the connection that you can bring only of your human experience. Try to connect and bring to life what it means to be alive, is this phrase I like to use. Okay, what does a script have to say about our culture, about our society, about what it means to be alive? And that will generally lead to some visual concept. And once you have that visual concept as a designer, which comes from the story and comes from your soul, right? Then you can pass that on and share those ideas with the writers, the director, the producers, all those people. And if it's a really good idea, chances are that that's going to make everything else kind of fall into place. And that will help solve many, many questions as you go down the path of production.
Okay, so you've been asked by Mr. Jacobs, you've been asked by one of the members of the audience about how you got your start, but you kind of just told us. But how did you land your first job?
Actually, fortunately, my family were subscribers to a season ticket holders, I should say, to a regional theater company in Rhode Island called Trinity Square. And at Trinity Square, I saw every play there for many years before I even got into college. And there was a brilliant director there and a brilliant designer there. So when I was in high school, I actually worked at that theater for a little while. And I reached out to the designer. The designer was a man named Eugene Lee. And Eugene Lee is a pretty famous guy, right? He designed Candide on Broadway. He was the designer on Saturday Night Live, and he still is the designer on Saturday Night Live. So he's very diverse and very interesting and very eccentric. And he liked me. There's this 17-year-old kid coming up to him saying, "Hey man, I think I want to do what you do." And his advice to me was, go to college, learn everything you can, design anything and everything you can. And when you get out, come look me up, kid, right? Well, 4 years later, after 4 years of college and a degree, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater, and going to Edinburgh Theater Festival 3 years in a row and designing for the Edinburgh Theater Festival for my college, I literally went and knocked on his door, and he gave me a job right away. And that was a job assisting him on an opera in Boston for Sarah Caldwell called The Damnation of Faust.
Oh,
After that came Sweeney Todd on Broadway. After that came The Scarlet Letter, which was a 6-hour miniseries for PBS. After that came Life in the Mississippi, another PBS series. And these all happened rapidly. I mean, this guy worked all the time. And I actually got to design a play at Trinity Square for Adrian Hall that Eugene didn't have time to do. So he said, "I'll light it, Matthew, you design it." So I did that. And those credits all happened in about 2.5, 3 years. So I was just like sent out and just given a lot of responsibility, and had some of the greatest times of my life were those times. Also, one of those projects I met my wife, who we've been married for 37 years. So things went well, and that just kind of propelled me into the full spectrum of designing for whatever, because he designed movies, designed plays, designed operas, designed Broadway shows, and I helped him out on all of this stuff, whether it was drawing or building models or supervising construction, whatever that may be. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I feel very, very fortunate to have had that experience. And of course, along the way, music MTV came along, and I was in the right place at the right time. So I'm designing big music videos, and that led to an offer to design a movie in Hollywood, and la-di-da.
Off you went. I remember seeing Sweeney Todd on Broadway. That's amazing. How much fun is that?
That was fun.
Ah, that's great. Yeah, Angela Lansbury. Whew.
She was great.
She was.
And Len Cariou.
And Len Cariou, and I'd worked with him at the Guthrie in Minneapolis. That was very sweet.
Yeah.
Ellen and Rick, we've talked a little bit about your backgrounds. If you could give anybody in this audience right now, the young people in this audience, or even the older people in this audience, some inspiring advice, what would you suggest to them?
Well, my last production designer, I think, took all the advice we always give to people who say, how do I get started? And made it the absolute most succinct version I've ever heard, which is show up on time and don't be an a-hole. No matter how many skills you bring and how great you think you are, when you get started in this street, you got to let all that go. You got to just know that you know nothing. You will show up and not know what a gaffer is or where crafty is or like how to get to set. But if you show up on time and you have a good attitude and you're helpful and you're genuine and honest, you will make it and you'll learn along the way.
Plus, you're a really good person. You're fun to work with and you're a nice person. You're a good person.
I am
Yes,
a good person.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. The other thing I would say is, because I didn't go to film school, I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know what a gaffer was. I didn't know what the blinking red light meant outside the stage. So, you listen a lot, you're going to learn a lot on the job. They can't teach you everything in school, so you're going to learn it on the job. So humility, knowing that you don't know, and being receptive and listening. But the other thing is, for me, it was getting involved. It was participating everywhere I could. And for me, that a lot of that was with my union, with my local. And you're going to meet people there. You're going to, they're going to find out your character and you're going to find out their character, and show up and volunteer and do things. Here's my pitch for the union. I spent 15 years doing architecture and commercial office space planning and design. And, when a company gets a big project and they hire people, and then when the project's done, if they don't have a follow-up one right away, there's a bunch of people out on the street looking for a job. So even though you think you have a secure career in architecture, ain't necessarily so, and you leave with nothing. And with a union, you have insurance, you're building, a nest egg, you're getting a pension, you're getting all those things thanks to our union and thanks to this industry. And if you keep your nose clean and work hard, one day you'll be able to put your pencil down and enjoy life. So I think that's key too. For me, anyway, it is. Yeah. You're going to meet a lot of people that way.
Great. And you, Matthew, what do you have to say?
I agree with both of them, and I do think the importance of having as many skills as you can possibly acquire before getting into the business is extremely important, because it doesn't matter how nice you are or how much you show up on time. If you can't do the job, right, you're not going to stick around for very long, right? So all these things are important. And then once you're there, I agree with Rick that it's important to show interest. It's important to kind of continue to kind of, hey, what else can I do? Show some enthusiasm. Because if you're not happy to be there, if you're not wanting to learn more, that will be noticeable as well. And once that happens, and you work hard and bring everything you can, you continue to learn as well. There's classes that can be taken. You can learn from by talking to people. So besides all that, once you get through it and you make it through a project and it's over, make sure you stay in touch with those people that can hire you again, right? Because there's a lot of really talented and ambitious, young people out there trying to get in, and I'm hiring, PAs all the time that have a lot of skills, and I'm helping people get into the union as well when it's possible. And the best ones are the ones that call you up, every so often. Don't bug us, don't bug me, but call every so often, or send me a text or an email and say, hey, what are you up to? Show some interest in me. If you show some interest in me, I'll show some interest in you. And maybe I can't get you on the next show, but I got a lot of friends that might be able to get you on the next show, right? So that kind of continuing to communicate. And if Brad were here, he would agree with me, because we worked on a show many years ago. And one of the things we agreed on is that the key to success is good communication, right? Mm-hmm. That is truly the key to success. And that comes with at work, that comes in your everyday life. You're going to have a successful relationship with someone. You need to learn to communicate really well. And that means listening and giving out good information. So that's my advice.
It's really interesting, because one of our panels tomorrow is Deb Riley, how she got her job, how she got her now 4 Emmys for Game of Thrones, really, was because she met the producer when the producer had come over to Australia to talk about looking for locations for something, and they hit it off. And then Barney went back to London, and they started their Belfast, I guess, and they started Game of Thrones. And then when Sarah Greenwood left, in the meantime, Deborah said to me, it was in my DNA to do Game of Thrones. But of course I wasn't going to replace Sarah Greenwood, but I just kept in touch. I just would call every once in a while, or I'd send her an email saying, this is what I'm doing. How are things going? Things like that, just keeping it going. And when Sarah left the show, Barney called her and said, you want a chance to come and audition, basically. And she said, I jumped at the chance. And fortunately, they weren't replacing the orchestra. They were just replacing the conductor. And she said, and I was not really prepared to be a production designer at that level, but the whole team really taught, but I could be a great cheerleader, and the whole team taught me how to become a really good production designer.
Wow.
And so that, to me, I think is also very inspiring, because then you know when to keep your mouth shut and when to actually be supportive, and how to go and and you know how everybody likes to be greeted positively about their work, and to be able to go around to people and say, God, that looks so great, and it just it keeps the team together, and it keeps everybody working together in a very harmonious way. There's another interesting story from one of our panelists tomorrow as well, who got his first job working with Dick Silbert when he was on Broadway. He was a Broadway designer, and Dick Silbert was doing Cotton Club.
Oh, yeah.
And you were probably there too at the time. And all of the designers from Broadway, Dick invited to the offices to see what to see what they were doing. And Win was the only black face in the room. And the next morning he called the office and asked to speak to Dick. And the receptionist said, do you know him? Are you friends? Does he know you? And Wynn said, I was the only black face in the room. So of course he must have known that I was not, seen me. So I said, yes, sure. And then he got Dick finally on the phone, and he talked Dick into being able to come in and do anything for him for free. He'd just come in and be there. And he said the first day he was in the office, he was asked to leave the office 4 times as they were going into private meetings. You have to remember, this was a long time ago. There were no cell phones. There were none of that. No computers even. Anyway, then he went back into Dick's office, and this executive producer came running into the office and said, okay, if you want to build this, you're going to get money from the studio to build this, we have to do white models so they can see it. And Dick looked at Wynn and said, you're from the theater, you can build white models, can't you? And Wynn said, sure. And Dick said, so you're on for 2 weeks. You're going to build the white models of these. He said the job lasted him 6 months. He was on the show for 6 months. And see, it's also, so part of it is to use your charms, and be willing to say yes to just about to anything, and always, and have a charming persistence. So it's not just being persistent and being obnoxiously persistent, but have a way of being charmingly persistent so that you can get in the door. It's really quite fun to look at some of these things. So Matthew, do you have a favorite genre that you like to do?
Not really. I think part of the thrill of my career and part of what I enjoy so much is just the variety. I don't want to be stuck in one thing or another. I kind of like doing it all. Eugene did it all and was very successful. And I haven't been quite as successful as Eugene, but I've been very successful still. And part of that is that I've been able to do some of everything, right? And that's made my life a whole lot of fun, my career a whole lot of fun. So yeah, really no preference.
Okay, here's a good question for everybody. Would you talk about what it's like to have to move from project to project and maybe not knowing when the next project is coming? And how do you manage that with your finances for your career? How do you manage the not knowing part regarding paying your mortgage and everything?
I would say, I think it's, once again, if you're in there and you're involved, you're gonna and you have skills, you're gonna work. I mean, it's really, for me, it's always, I had one slump in my career where there was like 6 months where nothing was happening. It just made me crazy. I wasn't in financial trouble, but I was like worried that, oh, nobody loves me or whatever, right? When am I going to work again? When am I going to be able to tell that story and get involved with something and have people around me and mix it up, right? So, a lot of it is more about timing. I mean, I get calls fairly regularly still, and it's really about, well, sorry, I can't do that. It sounds fantastic, but I'm committed to something, right? So just trying to line things up so that they work out properly. And then when you work, save money, just stash it away. Don't, I mean, it can seem like a big paycheck sometimes, right? It's like, even when you're young, it's like, I remember one of my first jobs was like, wow, $750 a week, right? And I was like, this is amazing, right? And it was way more than I'd ever made, right? And I didn't need it all. So I said, I'm going to put some of this away for a rainy day. So you take, $200 or $300, you put it in your savings, so that when you're out of work, you have something to do, right? You have some money, you got a place to go. So just try to be responsible and try to keep working, try to line things up. So you want that break between projects, but you don't want that huge break where, either financially or emotionally you have troubles.
Yes. What was it? Somebody said, I think it was Kate Banks who said she learned to bank the overtime and live on the straight time. So Rick, you're nodding. So how do you balance this?
Yeah, that was definitely Kate who taught me that lesson. But having the instability of an architecture career, I didn't really worry about the space in between, the not working. And it's interesting, you said $750 a week. That's what I got paid on the first thing I did in this movie as a set designer. It was a non-union. We worked 12 hours Monday through Friday and 10 hours on Saturday, and I got $750 a week. And I was so happy to get it. It's your foot in the door. You're going to have to pay some dues. You're going to have some downtime. And when you do have downtime, I pretty much worked steady the last 10 years at least, except we had a strike. And during the strike, I volunteered to production design a short film, a non-union short film, for free. And they actually used my apartment for most of the scenes. So, you just jump in there and you volunteer and you do something, and you're going to meet somebody, and somebody knows somebody, and you're going to, that's how a lot of this happens. And you create relationships with people. Ellen and I have worked together on a few things, and it's just a delight, and we actually did a very big production for TV anyway. It was huge sets in Texas. It was like, went on and on and on and on and on. It was Baghdad. We built Baghdad. And you don't have a whole lot of downtime, but when you do and you're on location, you go go-kart driving, you go bowling, or you do things together with these people. So, being on the road, I think, helps create those bonds with people, and they stick, and have faith. I used to say that the entertainment industry is a depression, recession-proof industry. It ain't a pandemic-proof industry. So we all shut down for a while, and then we came back, and now a lot of us are working again. So you'll turn the corner. But I agree, put some money aside, even if you're barely making the rent, put a little bit aside for those rainy days, because they come, particularly when you're starting. You're going to have some empty months there between a project or two. So that's my advice.
Yeah, great. Ellen, thank you.
I'm one of those weirdos that actually really loves the instability, because I came off 6 years of working in corporate with no time off ever, and still working 12 hours a day. So now I work 12 hours a day most of the time when I'm working, but it's really hard to spend any money. Like, unless you're buying supercars or boats or something, you just can't spend all the money you're earning, especially if you're working on location where you're getting extra bumps for idle days and per diems. You're just like, what do you do with all this cash? So, but the best part for me in between jobs when it's not a pandemic is that you get to then really dig into either some like serious volunteering on a project or going on a big trip. Like when I worked in corporate, I couldn't go somewhere for a month, but when you work in this business, you can come off a 6-month, 9-month show and then be like, okay, great. I take care of some life stuff. I'm going to go to Thailand for a month. That totally works out. So I think the instability is fantastic. You're never bored. And if your project sucks for any particular reason, it's going to be over within a year. So you always have a light to look forward to
Yeah.
in the tunnel. And if the project is great, then you have that anticipation of thinking, is my season going to come back? Or do you get a chance to break out and work with new people all the time? Or you can travel with the same team. I mean, everyone does it a little differently, but the creative energy that comes along with this industry is kind of like constant and flowing. And that's part of one of the best things about it. Is like, you're never going to be bored. If you're decent at your job, you're not going to be broke. And they feed you all day. You cannot spend enough money while you're working to deplete your bank account.
So would you suggest that people, recent graduates who want to work towards the art department, do you suggest that they try and get production assistance jobs in with the art department?
That's kind of always the obvious way in, and those are and we're always in need of good production assistants, especially in the art department. And it's amazing because I'm thinking like, geez, there's all these schools and all these kids of talent and coming out every year from all over the country, and where are they when you need them, right? So I don't know how they find out how to get lists of people to call or find out what shows are around, or, if they're getting the runaround by somebody or whatever. But just, instead of reaching out to the production office, whenever possible, reach out to the art director or the art department coordinator or something like that. We're hired very early. And generally speaking, we bring a PA on right away, and to help set up the offices and all that stuff. So we're the ones that are going to say, hey, I want, Bobby to come over here and work with us. And in they are. So PA is a great way in, the best way in.
Great. That's wonderful. What do you think, guys? The same thing?
Well, there aren't a lot of other choices, quite frankly, because of the union nature of Hollywood. So, I mean, you're not going to walk in and be a set designer unless something has gone terribly awry. I mean, there are rules in place and there are requirements in place. And also, just if you're fresh to the industry, you need to learn some stuff about how things work. And I guarantee you're not going to come out of school ready to be any one of these union roles. Some people go the route of doing a lot of indie films. And even if you do that, you've got to rack up a lot of indie films before you qualify for a union position. So you may still come in as a PA anyway. I do know a really excellent set designer who went a different route. She was an assistant to the people who managed the stock scenery at Sony for several years. So she really knew the business backwards and forwards from that side and became a really excellent, very skilled digital drafter. So she was able to get in. And all that work experience that you get is very, very useful. Like if you come straight out of school, if I see a pile of resumes on my desk, someone who has not had any work experience, I will probably put at the bottom of the pile. But even if your work experience is, building houses out in Atlanta, or you've helped your uncle paint something, or you detail cars, at least you have something. You have some background other than I just went to school. And that I guarantee you will be useful to somebody, because for someone like me, that little detail will stick in my head. And I'll go, oh wait, I know someone who could deal with that, and that's super, super helpful. But yeah, there's not a lot of, you can't just jump in another role. And if you people don't tend to shift from like the production office, as Matthew and Rick said, to the art department, because you get stuck being in production PA, getting coffee and filling out papers. So do meet as many art department people as you can, because you get recommendations from all over, from the set decorator, from the production designer, from the set designer, the graphic, like everyone knows somebody, and you're just like, oh yeah, that project sounds good too, and they'll pass your information along at the right time.
I like that story. In fact, I just hired a second assistant art director a couple of months ago when we came back in January. And she'd studied theater, got a degree in theater, set design. But to start working, to get working, she worked as a painter. She also had painting skills, worked as a painter. And then from there, kind of got into graphics. She had good computer skills. So she built up a portfolio of drawings and paintings and graphics and all that stuff. And then somebody hired her because of these skills graphically. Somebody hired her to be an assistant art director, right? Just because of those and her theater background, she was at the right place at the right time, and had shown that she was a survivor. I'm not going to hang around, or I don't want to be a PA. I need to make a little more than that. So I'm going to paint, I'm going to do graphics, I'm going to do anything I can, and kept talking to people. And she's turned out to be terrific. She's turned out to be just great. Still young and inexperienced, but I'm happy with young and inexperienced if they have that passion, if they show that enthusiasm. I'm more than happy to teach them and mentor them if I need to, right?
Yeah, the attitude is very important. Yes, that's true. And all of these wonderful things, if you had, I'd love to ask this question. If you had a really wonderful story, if you some wonderful story, whether it's a fiasco that turned around, or whether it's some set that you never thought would ever get done and it looked fabulous, and any kind of really wonderful story to tell, what story might that be of an experience of yours? Anything that pops into your head? Because we have so many different experiences. So I'll let you, you can chew on that one for a second if you want. But the other one that I like to ask too is, because how do you balance, because several of you have said, I work 12 hours a day and I'm with my creative family, or I'm on location in Texas for several months, or Matthew, you've been in Atlanta now since August, and your family is here. Well, part of them are anyway. And how do you balance your professional life with your personal life?
FaceTime.
That's great.
FaceTime and sending flowers and FaceTiming and talking about what we're going to do when the show's over, when we can travel safely, when the COVID pandemic is minimized to the extent where we feel safe to travel. In the past, I worked a lot on location, and I like it. And the only reason I went on a location because my kids were up and they through high school and college, and they're up and out of the house. And I got offered a job out of town and asked my wife, I said, babe, would you mind if I go to Hawaii for 10, 11 months? There's a show called Lost out there. And it's supposed to be fun. I've never seen it, but she said, yeah, as long as I can come visit and as long as you come back. So in the past, I've been in some interesting places and some kind of not so interesting places, but she'll come and visit, or the kids will come visit, or I'll come home and visit, or take a day or two off and take a long weekend. And I use the union holidays to my advantage. And we always travel and get together when we can. And now it's been a little tricky with the COVID, but so it's a little lonelier without that, but FaceTime is my friend. And send flowers, and she sends me a packet of mail every week, and I go through that, and we talk all the time. So, and I talk to my kids and my granddaughter and everybody. So it's nice. And I talk to, good friends as well. We FaceTime and just get on the phone, and we all have good imaginations. So we can imagine what it'd be like to be sitting in the room with that person, right? So we can kind of put ourselves in that little world and put ourselves in that happy space and imagine ourselves being there.
Yes, that's great. Rick, what do you do?
Well, I have a pretty independent streak. I do pretty well on my own. I'm pretty much on my own now, although I'm sort of sheltering in place with someone. But I actually like getting away. I do quite well when I'm on the road, to be honest with you. I have horses, and I miss them, and I miss, they ground me. They're noble beasts, and I miss taking care of them and doing the mundane things like, cleaning corrals and repairing things around the little ranch. But it's been an opportunity to see, different parts of the country that I might have traveled through, but never spent any time there. So I've learned a lot. I spent some time recently in Chicago on a show, and I learned that I like being in the city, but I'm not a high-rise kind of person. I want to, have a little land around me and live on the ground. So, you learn things, you learn what works for you. So I like the travel, and I like being out, seeing a new place, meeting new people. So it works for me very well, actually.
That's cool. How about you, Alan?
Well, I'll agree totally with everything Rick and Matthew have said. I'll also say I don't particularly balance well. I mean, everyone I know knows that if I'm on a show, that I'm kind of dead to the world until the show is over. Like you do miss events. You probably will not have a hobby that requires you to show up every week. No book club, no Aikido, or like unless you find someone with like a really crazy 4 a.m. schedule or something. But it doesn't mean you get to dive into all the things you love more deeply when you're between shows. And if you're working someplace fun or even slightly fun, people from home tend to come to you, which is kind of nice. So that breaks things up, and it is entertaining to be kind of an extended tourist. When you're, especially when someone else is paying for it, which is the best part. You get to live in a really nice apartment in Atlanta instead of kind of this little cheap apartment in the corner. So, but it is tough. It's a weird life, and it doesn't suit everybody. But I think the rewards, if you are prepared for it, are totally outbalance that.
Actually, I have a running joke with my husband because he will come into me and say, I'd love to go back and visit my college roommate and his wife back in Pittsburgh, and next week I'd get a job in Pittsburgh. And then he said to me, and following you, Matthew, then he said to me at one point, I've never been to Hawaii. And 2 weeks later, I was on my way to Lost and working at Lost myself. And that was the first season. And what was really interesting was just before the pandemic hit, he said he just came back from a musical instrument convention, and he said, we've been invited to have pizza with so-and-so in Italy anytime this summer.
Come on over for a pizza.
Right. And so then I got a job in the next couple of weeks in Italy, which was amazing. And then of course the pandemic hit, and then all of it stopped. So hopefully that'll come back, but we just have this sort of running joke between us that that's what happened. But the second and third years of my marriage, I was on Miami Vice in Florida, in Miami, Florida. And we had pagers, yes, but we didn't have any other kind. And thank goodness for a Watts line. So we could talk on somebody else's dollar across the country. And you guys don't even have any experience of this because your cell phones are like monthly charges and you can call anybody in the world. That was not the case back in those days. Oh my gosh, Brad's here.
Oh.
Hi, Brad.
Hey,
I'm sorry, I took a while. I was in a Zoom meeting and I have to go into another one in 15 minutes, but I thought I'd say hello anyway. How are you?
Well, tell everybody what you're working on, for heaven's sakes. I know that it's they're going to be sorry they've left already, but we've been a great, exciting panel, and Matthew's talked about you already, so there you go.
Hi, Matthew.
Hey, Brad.
I'm in Atlanta again. I just got back from Boston. I was in Boston for many months. I was working on Don't Look Up, which is an Adam McKay movie, and now I'm in Atlanta working on the Black Panther sequel. So I've kind of jumped from one frying pan into a fire, but it's an interesting one. So anyway, I just am getting familiar with it. Hannah Beachler is the production designer, and she's been on it for almost a year. They shut down because of COVID, like a lot of these shows, but not totally. They kept developing ideas and illustrations and plans. And so some of the people didn't come back. I replaced someone who didn't return. And so I'm new to this show. I just started 3 weeks ago and trying to figure out what we're doing because we're only about 18 weeks out from shooting now. So it's a little scary, but we've got a lot to do. And shooting all in Atlanta, some maybe in another state, but a lot of very, very different, some very different challenges in this one. It should be interesting.
I'm interested because we were just talking about doing the difference between television and movies. And the fact that you have a different script and a different storyline every 8 days, and you're telling us that you have 18 weeks, and that's going to be a very short amount of time before you start shooting.
Yeah, that's a big difference. I think one of the things is the size of the builds, because when you're building sets that involve a lot of materials and a lot of finishes and a lot of special effects and stunts and things like that, it's very different. So I think if you're doing a straightforward story where people are talking to each other and they're in a realistic setting, then it's possible to build something in a couple of weeks or even find locations. But when you're doing a fictional world, then you can't just find a location for everything. Of course, a story like Black Panther does have a reality side. There are people who are in the real world mixed with people who are in the hidden secret world of Wakanda. So it's a little of both. There will be some locations. There will be some realistic sets.
I think it's really. Can you tell us what you told me about what the producers said to the art department?
Oh, well, I mentioned to Mimi just because she was saying how some producers don't think the art department is all that important, and I said that's not what I hear. I said just yesterday, the producer on the show said, the art department has to really drive this movie. And I thought, what? Uh-oh, okay. I know what you mean, but I just got here. But it's like they're looking for answers. They're looking for ideas. Sometimes it even changes the script. And, they expect us to kind of say, okay, this is how we should do it. This is how we should provide what you have in the script. There's a way to do it, and here's how. And it's, part of our job, I think, to make things doable, which isn't always easy with seemingly impossible things. But visual effects plays a big part in that. And so working in tandem with visual effects, you kind of say, this is what I think would work. If we did this and you did that, but neither of us do it alone right now. You have to work together. And usually the rest of the movie is the first meetings on a big movie are really all about concept that's usually from the art department and logistics about how to do it, which is from special effects, the art department, construction, and visual effects, trying to say, okay, it is possible to do this movie about going to the moon or going to Wakanda or going to the bottom of the ocean or whatever it is you're doing. It's trying to figure out how they're going to deal with the challenges.
Yeah,
Put something on the screen, especially a thing like Marvel, which is in its very name, it's supposed to show you unbelievable things. You're supposed to marvel at whatever they show you. So it's kind of like you really have to have something incredible to even make it into the story.
and that you do with Black Panther, the sequel. What did you describe
I
it
hope so.
as Black futurism or something like that the other day?
Oh, I called it Afrofuturism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a real term that kind of popped up in the 70s. And recently there was a illustrator who died, who was the guy who did all the illustrations for Parliament Funkadelic's record albums.
Oh my God.
And he kind of did this sort of he had kind of a flying saucer theme, and it took over of their, or kind of became like a subtext in their band. And the interviews with him were in, I think, Hyperallergic magazine, online magazine, art magazine. And it was kind of like he really just kind of came up with this. You know, they were not a huge band, and he had this idea for Afrofuturism, and you know, it's become kind of a genre of kind of a mix of kind of a space age future with traditional Afro patterns and themes. You see it in people's work, you know, who are musicians as well as artists.
So would you give us an overview of the difference between a supervising art director and an art director? Because you were a supervising art director and you worked
Well,
on movies like Inception and Tonto and or Lone Ranger, I guess. Yes.
Well, you gave him lead credit. That was very nice of you. Maybe you should have that. But the yeah, I mean, I've done both, of course. I've gone all the way from being like a 2-man art department to a, you know, 30-man art department. And the problem is when you get really big, you have to delegate things more. So same sort of job, but on, for instance, Moneyball, they said, do you want to call yourself supervising art director? I said, no, I'm the only art director, you know, because the people working for me, I had a few set designers, like 3 set designers and 1 graphic designer. And so I said, who am I supervising? You know, I'm the art director. But if the show starts to get big enough that you just need one art director is doing the things in the jungle, and another art director is doing the things on the island, and another art director is doing the things on the stages, and another one's doing the things in the abandoned factory, you have to say, okay, well, we'll divide the job up and we'll have several art directors, and one of them will have this area and someone else will have that area. And usually they have a couple of set designers working with them, each person. And, you know, so when you have 12 set designers and you have 4 art directors, someone has to figure out who's doing what, and you all confer about it. But the supervising art director has to coordinate it and hire people and talk to the production designer more and to the producers more and say, this is what the budget is going to be because this is what the designs are and this is what the construction coordinator says it will cost. What do you want to do about it? Do we have a green light to go ahead and build or not? And you go case by case more and more on these shows. You have to figure out the budget for every set. You end up writing a sort of schedule for all the personnel, when people will be hired and when they'll be finished. And sometimes they won't let you start anyone until they know the cost of the whole movie for the art department. They'll say, oh, well, I don't know, I can't really let you hire an art director until you tell me how many weeks they'll be on. I go, well, when are we shooting and when are we wrapping? And, you know, then you figure out how many illustrators you think the production designer needs. Maybe they've already started a couple and they want more, and you put in the weeks for them and the weeks for you and the weeks for the PAs, and you do this huge flow chart that looks like you're working for, you know, a big company, and you suddenly are predicting how many weeks everyone will have, and then they sign off on that and they say, okay, yeah, you can hire a couple of people, and then you're held to that somewhat. You know, they'll say, oh, wasn't set designer number 4 supposed to finish on the 12th? They went an extra week. Who are you going to take that week away from? You know, it's like you have to be an accountant too. You have to be a producer, which is kind of a pain about being a supervising art director, because a lot of it is running a train station. You know, it's like when do people start and when do they finish, and how much do sets cost, and you're kind of trying to manage quite a bit. And at the same time, you know, you're working with a bunch of artists and people have ideas, and then you're trying to make it fit in a budget, and you go like, we can't have 2 fireplaces in this room. It'll never get approved. That's just like crazy. We don't need 2 fireplaces. That's not going to be in the budget. And you suddenly start to think like a producer and tell everyone they have to make the ceilings lower and, you know, make things simpler. And so it gets kind of, you kind of annoy yourself after a while, and it's more fun sometimes to just be designing.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's a great way of putting it. I was thinking because I remember talking to Guy Diaz about Inception and his saying that he was flying from place to place so much, and you worked on that too. You were his supervising art director.
Yeah, it was. And that's another thing that happens a lot. You often have to sort of fill the role of production designer when the production designer isn't there, or take on part of their role depending on what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so on that, he was in Tunisia, he was in Paris, he was in London, and I was still designing sets with like 4 set designers in LA. And so we were in touch. We were on calls all the time and emails and figuring things out, but a lot had to be done when he wasn't there. The whole train sequence was kind of done without him seeing it. The Paris loft workshop, a lot of things he came back and said, oh, he saw it evolving, but it all had to take place without him around. And that's happened on other shows where the production designer was in Prague and I was in LA, and I was doing this huge fight, a huge stunt scene on a farm with helicopters and motorcycles. Well, you know what? I'm sorry, but I'm going to have another Zoom call in 3 minutes. So to talk about the set list, because I've broken down the script. That's another thing that supervising art director often does, is read the script, break it down into every scene, figure out what's happening in all those scenes and what you think you have to build and what you don't have to build, and what's on a stage and what's on a location, and what's just purely VFX and against blue screen, and what is maybe, could be found. So now I'm going to go talk about that and explain myself. So
Well,
trying
Brad,
to figure out the whole movie, which is not easy.
yes, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not. And I just really am grateful. We're grateful that you could attend to be with us this afternoon for a few minutes, because we really, and Matthew was looking forward to seeing you too. And I know you're both in the same city, right?
Yeah, well, we'll have to get together pretty soon, Matthew. We'll do that.
Lobster rolls, I think, are in our future.
I agree. I know where to find them. And I've just come from New England. I have to say some of the best lobster rolls around are in Atlanta at Beetle Cat.
Sure, I'm going back there when we're on break in June. I'm going to the house in Rhode Island for a week and a half. So
Excellent.
lobsters are in
Well,
my.
I had a lobster roll last weekend at the Optimist. It wasn't as good as Beetle Cat.
Oh, I know.
Okay, we'll take note of that, right? Because
Okay.
Rick likes to work in Atlanta too.
We'll
Well,
be talking.
we can
Thank
give
you.
advice.
Thank you,
Okay,
guys,
thanks.
and thank you,
Bye,
everybody,
everybody.
for attending
Cheers.
today. It was a wonderful panel, and we'll say thank you to Matthew and Rick and Ellen. You have any final words that you'd like to share?
No, just nice to be here, and good luck, everybody. Nice, good talking to you. It's a great fun thing to do, what we're doing. So
I think it's the
enjoy
most.
it.
Don't
Yeah.
you think it's the most fun job on the movie? Don't you think
Yeah,
I think it's the most
sure.
fun job on a movie is making the environments. I just think it's so much fun.
All right, I gotta go.
Bye, and
Bye,
thank
thank
you again
you.
for taking the time, all of you.